While my sister lived like a princess, I was stuck in the attic with a bucket for rainwater. When our parents lost everything and needed shelter, I led them right back up those same stairs. I used to lie awake at night, watching the moonlight leak through the crack in the attic roof, pooling like silver tears on the wooden floor beside my mattress. The wind would rattle the window pane, and if it rained, I had a bucket to catch the water, my only luxury. Downstairs, laughter echoed from the dining room where my sister, Evelyn, sat in the master bedroom with her scented candles, fairy lights, and marble vanity, the princess of our family home. It wasn't always like this. Once upon a time, I thought I mattered too. When I was 7, I believed my parents loved us both the same. I believed that hard work and kindness counted for something. But that illusion shattered slowly and painfully, like watching a snow globe fall in slow motion. You see, Evelyn was loud, sparkly, and good at charming adults. I was quiet, bookish, difficult. My mother once whispered to a neighbor when she didn't know I was listening. "We try, but Alex he doesn't fit." By the time I was 10, the house was no longer mine. My sister had taken over every space. Her ballet trophies lined the mantel. Her framed paintings covered the hallway walls. Even the family computer had been relocated to her room because she needs it for editing, my mom said, waving off my protests. Then came the big change. My room, a small but warm bedroom at the end of the hall, was suddenly needed. "Your sister's turning 14. She deserves her own space," Dad told me one night over dinner. "She's growing up and it's time we support her." "And where do I go?" I'd asked, my fork frozen halfway to my mouth. They didn't flinch. "The attic. It's perfectly fine, just until we redo the guest room." They never redid the guest room. The attic was cramped, dusty, and smelled like old pine and mold. The single window was stuck shut. There was no heat in the winter, no fan in the summer, and when it rained, water slipped through the cracked shingles, pattering into the bucket I placed beside my mattress. I was 12. I remember dragging my box of books up the narrow staircase, my arms shaking with each step. Evelyn watched me from the landing, a smile twitching at the corners of her lips. "Poor attic boy," she said. "Maybe up there you'll finally be quiet." My parents didn't say a word. That night I cried. Quietly. Into my pillow. Because I knew no one would come check on me. School became my only escape, though even there, Evelyn's shadow loomed. She was 2 years older, popular, always smiling, always praised. Teachers knew her name before she stepped in the room. When they met me, their eyebrows lifted. "Oh, Evelyn's brother?" Then came the look, the one that said, "How did you happen?" At home, it got worse. Every chore fell to me. Dishes. Yard work. Cleaning the bathrooms. "Evelyn has exams," my mom would say. Or, "She needs time to focus on her dance recital." Meanwhile, I was scrubbing mildew from the downstairs shower with bleach that burned my hands. No gloves. No thanks. Once, I asked if I could skip dinner to study for a big math test. Mom laughed. "Honey, you don't have real pressure like your sister. Just eat and do your chores." When Evelyn got a new phone for Christmas, an iPhone, no less, I unwrapped socks. "You're not really into gadgets, right?" Dad had said, smiling awkwardly. I nodded. I lied. When I turned 16, I got my first job, not because I wanted to, but because my parents said it was time I learned to contribute. Evelyn, meanwhile, got a car for her birthday. I still remember the night I came home after my first double shift. My legs were aching, my apron stained with fried grease. As I opened the front door, I heard them laughing in the living room. Evelyn, sprawled on the couch, was showing them some photos from her beach shoot. My mother clapped her hands. "You look like a model. Just beautiful." No one looked up when I entered. No one asked how work was. No one even noticed. I slipped upstairs and into the attic where the air smelled like wet wood and dust. I didn't even bother turning on the light. I just sat on the edge of the mattress and stared at the dark. 3 months later, it happened. I got pneumonia. They didn't notice until I fainted in the kitchen while carrying a basket of laundry. The doctor asked my mom, "Didn't you notice his breathing?" She blinked. "He's dramatic. He likes to play sick." The doctor's expression turned cold. "He has fluid in his lungs. He should have been in the hospital days ago." They didn't visit me much while I was admitted. Evelyn was too busy, and my parents didn't want to bring stress into the house. When I got home, there was no warm soup. No balloons. No card. Just the attic, still leaking. I was 17. I started saving money. Quietly. I took every extra shift. Every holiday shift. I worked weekends. Nights. I stopped asking for anything because I knew no one was listening anyway. I graduated early. No celebration. Evelyn got a huge party when she graduated art school. String lights, catered food, even a photographer. They called her their golden child. I moved out the next day. I didn't leave a note. Years passed. I rented a one-bedroom apartment and poured everything into building a life. I worked, studied, invested, started my own IT services business. I learned discipline, patience, the kind you only master when you've been underestimated your whole life. Evelyn, she tried to become a social media influencer. It lasted a year. Then she started painting again, selling pastel beach scenes for $20 at flea markets. My parents kept covering for her. She's just finding herself, they'd say. When they lost their jobs during the recession, I didn't offer help. They didn't ask, until everything collapsed. It started with a voicemail. "Alex, we need to talk." I hadn't heard my father's voice in years. I didn't answer. A week later, my mother showed up at my office unannounced. Thinner, tired. Her eyes darted nervously. She had never been to my office before. "We're losing the house," she said quietly. "The bank's foreclosing. We don't know where to go." I stared at her and said nothing. It didn't take long after the attic arrangement for the lines to be drawn. The master bedroom, once a place I'd only seen in glimpses when I passed by, was now practically off limits. My sister filled it with plush pillows, LED lights, vanity mirrors, designer bags, and the constant scent of imported perfumes. And yet, despite living under the same roof, we couldn't have been farther apart. At family dinners, she would casually toss jabs cloaked in jokes. "Oh, maybe don't give him the nice china," she'd say, laughing. "You know, in case the attic moisture messed with his coordination." Mom and Dad laughed. Every time. And when I didn't laugh, I was called sensitive, overreacting, unappreciative. The real shift, though, the moment things stopped just being unfair and became cruel, came the summer I turned 16. That year, the local community college launched a summer program, early college credit, funded scholarships, job placement pathways. I had the grades. I had the essay. I had the quiet hunger to do something, to be someone. I filled out the application in secret in the attic using the weak glow of a battery-powered lamp. I remember the excitement vibrating in my chest when I sealed that envelope. Weeks passed. Then one day, I got the envelope back, opened. Dad was standing in the living room holding it like trash. "We said no distractions this summer," he said flatly. "You'll help at the shop." The shop was our family's hardware store. Crumbling shelves, leaky pipes, long hours, zero pay. I was going to take the bus there after class. "You're not going." End of discussion. I looked to Mom. She was rearranging napkins. She didn't even glance up. I got in, I whispered. "I worked hard. You helped the family. That's what real kids do." I don't remember walking up the attic stairs. I only remember sitting on the wooden floor, letter in hand, watching a drop of water from the leaky roof smear the college logo. Summer passed in a blur of heat, sweat, and dust. I spent every morning lifting inventory, scrubbing aisles, smiling for customers, while my sister spent hers lounging poolside with her new boyfriend, Marcus, a guy so rich his car had its own Instagram account. He brought her lunch every day, sushi rolls in black boxes, smoothies topped with gold flakes. When they kissed in the driveway, Mom would pretend to be watering plants so she could watch. Dad called Marcus son. And me? I ate sandwiches in the store's back room, usually behind the mop bucket. That fall, I got sick. Nothing dramatic, just a respiratory infection made worse by the damp attic. The doctor said rest, dry air, warmth. I begged to be moved downstairs. Just for a week. Just so I could breathe. Mom pursed her lips. "Your sister needs the master bedroom. It has her skincare fridge." Dad added, "You'll be fine. Don't dramatize." I coughed blood that night. Into a towel. Alone. The only thing that kept me grounded was the stack of library books I smuggled into the attic like contraband. I read by flashlight. I learned everything I could about business, economics, real estate. I studied blueprints, read zoning laws, watched lectures on YouTube until my eyes blurred. It became my secret life. That's when the idea of ownership started growing inside me. I didn't know what it meant yet. I didn't know how I'd do it. But I clung to the thought like a lifeline. Someday this house will not hold me prisoner. It will be mine and I will be free. Years passed. My sister got accepted to NYU, of course she did, and my parents threw a party that made local news. Literally. There was a segment on the community channel about local families' bright future. She wore white. I wasn't invited to speak. I parked cars. When she left, the master bedroom sat untouched for a while. I thought maybe, just maybe, I'd get it. Instead, Mom turned it into a shrine. Photos of my sister. Her trophies. Her letters. The college sweatshirt perfectly folded. A framed tweet she wrote that got 2,000 likes. I remained in the attic. When I turned 21, I was still in that attic. Still working the store. Still coming home to the same chipped steps and slanted ceiling. But now I had a bank account. I had savings. I had a secret online job consulting for small e-commerce stores. I had a Roth IRA. I had read every book on financial independence the library had to offer. I started dressing better. Sharpening my posture. I got a haircut. Began talking less, watching more. And that's when my sister came home. Not for good, just for winter break. She brought new suitcases. A new nose. A new attitude. She also brought debt. Apparently, Marcus had left her. NYU tuition was mounting. She asked my parents if they could help. They said yes. They dipped into their retirement savings, refinanced part of the house. For her. Not me. Never me. I remember standing in the kitchen watching her stir her imported tea while she laughed at something on her phone. I had just come in from a shift. My hands were still stained from paint and wood dust. You know what's funny? She said suddenly, not looking at me. I told my roommate about your attic and she thought I was joking. Said it sounded like a Dickens novel. She sipped. I told her it's fine. You don't really have, ambition anyway, right? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. That night, I checked my email. The escrow papers were ready. Because, you see, I had quietly bought a property. Not the house. Not yet. But a building. A commercial lot. And it was just the beginning. When my sister flew back to New York, she hugged everyone goodbye. Even me. You're doing okay, right? She asked, her voice syrupy. I nodded. Good. Stay here. It suits you. And just like that she left. So did my final drop of tolerance? From that day on, everything I did, every dollar I saved, every class I took, every connection I made, was pointed toward one goal. Taking back the narrative. Not just for me. For the attic. For every breath I held. Every ceiling leak I dodged. Every dinner I was left out of. I would rise. And they wouldn't even see it coming. They say time heals all wounds. That's not true. Time just makes them easier to hide. Mine never really healed, they just stopped bleeding. But they burned beneath the surface, fueling everything I did after the day I left that house. I didn't leave with much. A torn duffel bag. My savings from working weekends at the gas station. A few notebooks full of scribbles and plans I once hoped would matter. What I did have, though, was silence, finally, and the bitter promise I'd made to myself the night I fell asleep with rain dripping onto my pillow: you'll never be at their mercy again. It took years. At first, I worked like a ghost, invisible, unnoticed. I stocked shelves in a 24/7 store during the night and delivered flyers door to door during the day. I crashed on the futon in a shared basement apartment with 3 strangers and mold. But every paycheck, no matter how small, was split in two: half to survive, half to invest. I read everything. Business books from the library. Online articles about real estate flipping. I studied stories of people who'd climbed out of nowhere. I memorized the rules, then learned how to break them. By 25, I was managing properties. By 27, I owned my first. A year later, I signed for the block. It wasn't flashy. I didn't buy a mansion or throw money around. I lived modestly in a small but clean apartment and kept to myself. But every time I walked into a bank and was addressed as Mr. Danner, every time I signed a document as property owner, something inside me stitched back together. Then came the day I drove past my old neighborhood. The house was smaller than I remembered, warped siding, peeling shutters, the front yard yellowed with neglect. But the attic window was still there, cracked and clouded. I could almost see myself through it, 17, curled on a stained mattress, listening to laughter from downstairs and wondering what I'd done to deserve exile. I parked across the street and just watched. It was empty. No car in the driveway. No toys on the lawn like my sister's kids used to leave. Just silence. A for sale by owner sign tilted in the overgrown grass. At first, I didn't believe it. They're selling the house? But when I called the number, a weary voice on the other end confirmed it. Yes, the house was for sale. Yes, the seller was motivated. And yes, the family who once insisted it would never leave our name was desperate to offload it before foreclosure. I didn't even flinch when she told me the price. I bought it in cash. That should have been the moment I felt triumph. I waited for it, that surge of righteousness, that victorious sting. But when I stepped into the house again, it wasn't satisfaction I felt. It was emptiness. The wallpaper was the same. The smell of old cooking oil clung to the walls. Even the attic stairs creaked the same way as I climbed them. Up there, the bucket was gone, but the stains remained. The roof still leaked. I stood in the same corner where I used to sleep and whispered, "You made it." Then I set to work. I didn't move in. I didn't turn it into a shrine or a rental. I restored it. Not for them, for me. I fixed every leak, repainted the walls, reinforced the attic roof, and even put improper insulation. But I left the attic unfinished on purpose. I kept the wooden floorboards, the narrow window, even the draft. Not out of spite, not exactly, but as a reminder of what was taken, of what I reclaimed. And then, almost on cue, they came back. It started with a knock. I opened the door to see my mother, her hair thinner, her eyes more sunken than I remembered. She wore an anxious smile, like a woman who wasn't sure she was welcome. "Daniel," she said, we didn't know where else to go." Behind her stood my father, holding 2 suitcases and a defeated expression I didn't recognize. He used to puff his chest like a peacock, declaring everything he did was for the family's pride. Now he looked small, tired, hollow. And next to him, of course, was my sister, Diane. Still immaculate. Still dripping with designer labels, though the brand names had faded. She avoided my eyes. "I told them you might not open the door," she said, her voice brittle. "I almost didn't," I replied. They shuffled into the living room. My father cleared his throat, trying to regain some of his old authority. "The bank took our home," he said. "We lost our pensions. The retirement fund, it's gone." And my mother added quickly, "We didn't know who else to ask." There was silence. Diane looked around like she still owned the place. "So," she said lightly, "you fixed it up. It looks good." I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. "Thanks." I had some motivation. They assumed I'd just let them in. That I'd forgive and forget. That I'd hand over rooms, maybe the master bedroom, the one Diane used to have while I froze upstairs. I let them settle. I offered tea. I made small talk. And then, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I stood and said, "Your room's ready." They perked up. My mother smiled in relief. My father gave a grateful nod. I led them upstairs. Past the master bedroom. Past the guest rooms. All the way to the attic. I opened the door. The air was colder up here, though I'd installed a small heater. The slanted ceiling still pressed down. The narrow window still barely opened. The insulation stopped at the stairs. "This is it," I said. My father blinked. "The attic." My mother frowned. "Daniel, this isn't." "You used to say it was good enough for me," I said, turning to face them. "So I figured it should be good enough for you." Diane snorted. "You're kidding." I looked her in the eye. "Do I look like I'm kidding?" She turned red. My father looked away. My mother bit her lip, unsure if she should cry or scream. But I didn't care. I handed them a single key. "You're welcome to stay for now. But this is your space." Just like it was mine. They didn't argue. Not really. Not after everything they'd lost. Not when they knew, deep down, that I was showing them more grace than they ever showed me. That night, I sat downstairs in the warmth of my restored living room, sipping wine and listening to the quiet creak of footsteps above me. The same creak I used to hear from below, always reminded that I didn't belong. Now it was different. Now they were the ones upstairs. In the cold. In the dark. And I was free. Not because I'd gotten revenge. But because I no longer needed their approval. I had rebuilt myself from their ashes. And soon they'd know just how much stronger I'd become. The first night they spent in the attic, I didn't sleep. Not because I was uncomfortable. I had a queen-sized bed now, a silent heater, a view of the city from my upstairs office window. I didn't pace the floor or reread childhood journals. I didn't cry. I just lay there listening. Every creak above my head was a memory. Of winter nights when I wore 2 coats to bed because my breath frosted in the attic air. Of rainy evenings when I'd shift my pillow around the bucket. Of birthdays I celebrated alone, hearing laughter rise from the rooms below. Now it was them up there. The mattress was thinner than mine had been. I'd made sure of that. And the draft? I hadn't fixed it completely. Just enough to remind them. The first few days were quiet. They tried to act grateful. Polite. Careful. They cooked breakfast once. Washed the dishes after. My mother left a thank you note on the counter, her handwriting still the same cursive I'd copied as a child when I was trying to impress her with handmade birthday cards. But guilt doesn't last long in people like them. By the end of the week, Diane was asking for the Wi-Fi password. "I've got a Zoom call with a potential gallery," she explained, sipping from one of my mugs like she'd never left. I gave her the guest password, the one that expired after 2 hours. 2 days later, my father asked if they could move into the guest room, just for a while, he said, rubbing his temple. "Your mother's back can't take the floor mattress." I smiled. "So she'll be using the bed now?" He blinked. "What? Her back can't handle what mine did for almost a decade?" "Just checking." He went silent. One night, I caught Diane in the hallway. She was standing outside the master bedroom, hand resting on the doorframe, staring in. "You really kept it exactly like it was," she said. "I renovated it." "No, I mean the layout. My dresser. My vanity. It's not yours anymore." She looked at me, then laughed, soft and bitter. "You've been waiting for this, haven't you?" I didn't flinch. I didn't have to wait. I built it. They started staying out longer after that. Job hunting, they claimed. Visiting friends. Some days they were gone from morning to midnight. I didn't ask where. I didn't care. But Diane always came back first. Always alone. Her marriage had ended a year prior, in scandal. Her ex had apparently drained the joint accounts and left her with debts and a reputation she couldn't clean. The girl who once walked on clouds now scrolled job boards in my kitchen, chewing her lip and pretending not to notice how far she'd fallen. One afternoon, I came home to find her looking through my bookshelf. She was holding a hardcover I hadn't touched in years, Business for Builders. "I didn't know you read this kind of thing," she said. "You didn't know much about me." She hesitated. "I know more now." I didn't respond. She added, quieter, "I was cruel. Back then." Still, I said nothing. Because forgiveness is a process. And I wasn't sure she deserved the first step yet. The Real break came 2 weeks later. I was hosting a small dinner. Just a few colleagues. Business partners. A mentor who'd helped me close my first deal. The kind of people who wore suits without ties and sipped neat bourbon while discussing market trends. Diane wasn't invited. But she came downstairs anyway. In a low-cut dress, heels, makeup she hadn't worn since her influencer days. She laughed too loudly. Asked my guests about their startups. Dropped the name of her old agent. Asked someone if they knew a guy named Devin who totally owed her a favor. She was trying to reclaim something. Charm, perhaps. Or relevance. And my guests, polite as they were, smiled through it. Until one of them, a sharp-eyed woman named Kara, asked quietly, "Is she your girlfriend?" I shook my head. "My sister," I said. "She lives in the attic." The following morning, Diane didn't come down for breakfast. By evening, she was gone. Left a note on the counter, "Thank you for everything. I think it's time I stopped being your shadow." No apology. No acknowledgement. But I understood. Some lessons don't come with confessions. Some come with quiet exits. My parents left the next week. Dad found a trailer on the edge of town. A friend owed him a favor. Mom didn't look at me when they packed. She just folded shirts into the same suitcase I'd once watched from the stairs as she packed for Diane's college dorm. When they left, I didn't say goodbye. I just closed the door. And then I went upstairs. To the attic. It was empty again. Still drafty. Still plain. But it didn't feel like a prison anymore. It felt like a museum. A reminder of what had been. And what I'd outgrown. Years later, when I gave a talk at a local college about resilience and entrepreneurship, someone asked, "What motivated you?" I paused. Then smiled. "A roof that leaked," I said. "And a house that tried to bury me." They laughed, but I didn't. Because I wasn't joking. I just finally had the view from below and from above. Both. At the same time. And it was everything.